Welcome to House Education, February 11th, 2026. This morning, we are going to begin with testimony from the field regarding proposal bill about chronic absenteeism. Again, we've created this into a committee bill because there's a lot to it rather than shoehorning it into a miscellaneous ed bill. That's why it's got the long number. Anyway, we had testimony yesterday from the Vermont Principals Association that resulted in a couple of good suggestions that the committee seemed to agree with, but look forward to further testimony from the superintendents around the state. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be back, kind of. I'm Chelsea Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. I am going to be really brief because I want to give most of the time to the superintendents here and education administrators that are here. And hopefully, I've read the testimony. It's fantastic. I think it will be a good look at chronic absenteeism from their lens. But what I wanted to just say is I hope you'll invite the School Boards Association in around the school board policy. What I'm really hoping to see is what that policy would do, like what the aim is, maybe a little bit, even if it's not written in law, like what the vision for that policy is, what it would include, and what the ultimate purpose of that school board policy is. But I will defer to my friends at the Vermont School Boards Association to speak more about the specifics of that. And then Wendy Baker is going to talk a little bit about the letter that you received from us yesterday, but we're hoping that you might consider adding a couple of provisions around home study as they relate to chronic absenteeism. And really, that's just a return to regulation and law that we had pre-2023 and was dropped, I think, predominantly due to the pandemic and just a lot of pressures on the Agency of Education that you'll hear kind of firsthand from Wendy, the impact that that kind of fallback of the regulations has had on students, some of our most vulnerable students. So hope you'll consider adding that. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Libby and Wendy.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Libby, I think you're up first.
I am, and I want to invite my friend Nick, who I think is in the room, to come sit in the hot seat.
All right.
There he is.
Thank you. If you'd both introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Yeah, we will most definitely do that. Thank you. For the record, my name is Libby Bonesteel, Superintendent of Schools for the Montpelier-Roxbury Public Schools. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss a challenge that has remained front and center in my district since the pandemic. I'm joined today by Nick Connor, our Director of Student Engagement and Data. If the committee has technical questions regarding the nuances of chronic absenteeism or the mechanics of intentional student support, I will happily yield the floor to Nick. He is the leading expert, not only in the state, but nationally on this topic and has been instrumental in transforming our district systems. We want to thank the Agency of Education for elevating chronic absenteeism to the legislature. While this has been an indicator of school quality in over 35 states for years, we are gratified that Vermont is finally giving this challenge the attention it deserves. The Vermont Principals Association has already testified regarding the why, the immense academic and social emotional toll absenteeism takes on a child. We concur entirely. When a child is not accessing their education, there should be enormous red flashing lights signaling that something is significantly wrong. However, the critical question isn't whether absenteeism is a problem, but how we respond to it. As written, this bill essentially codifies a failing status quo. We have ample evidence that current truancy practices do not return students to the classroom. Specifically, the mandate that a principal notify a truancy officer after 20 unexcused absences, leading to a DCF report and a former letter of obligation, is a cycle of judgment and shame. Parents are already acutely aware that their children are missing school. A formal reminder of their legal obligation does not solve the underlying crisis. It merely alienates the very families we need to partner with. And to be clear, most of the families we are supporting with a high rate of absenteeism are those who are also experiencing poverty. Furthermore, we must address the distinction between excused and unexcused absences. Lost time is lost time. Regardless of the label, the instructional loss is the same. The provision allowing pre-planned family commitments is laced with systemic privilege. It might imply that a family vacation is a valid reason for absence, while a student staying home to care for a sick sibling because a single parent cannot miss work is a violation. This language, as drafted, risks penalizing poverty and stigmatizing the struggles of the working class. At MRPS, we have shifted from a punitive system to a multi-tiered system of support for attendance. Our results speak for themselves. Our chronic absentee rate peaked at 32% during the COVID-19 years and has plummeted to 16%, even amidst the current flu and sniffles season at elementary schools. For reference, the national average hovers around 24%. Our framework prioritizes engagement before enforcement. Tier 1 or universal is engagement and belonging. Kids come to school when they feel they belong and are challenged by high quality instruction. We monitor attendance data weekly to ensure no student slips through the cracks. In targeted intervention or early connection, in tier 2 is when a child misses just 2 days of school. It's the classroom teacher, the person with the strongest relationship with the student, reaching out to the family. They don't call to scold, they call to ask, how are you? And how can we help get you back to school? And tier 3 is our very intensive remediation or wraparound services. This for us is code red. We deploy social workers, conduct home visits, and provide tangible support like transportation. We treat absenteeism as a barrier to be removed, not a rule to be enforced. Punitive action must be the absolute last resort, not the first. We cannot prosecute our way out of an attendance crisis. Support from outside legal agencies should only occur when every internal tier of supportive intervention has been exhausted. We have significant concerns with any legislation that defaults to punishing students and families before ensuring schools provide essential support. We urge the committee to reconsider the punitive triggers in this bill and instead incentivize the supportive frameworks we know actually work. We would be more than happy to come back and testify about legislation currently in action in states like Connecticut that stands on a supportive frame. Nick and I are happy to take any questions you may have. And like I said, Nick is the expert, so probably direct it to him.
Thank you. It seems that when the Agency of Education came in to testify, one of their goals was to step away from the previous punitive or the current punitive action and make it less punitive and a little more restorative, maybe might be the right word. But are you saying that even what's being proposed, it remains still too punitive?
Go ahead, Nick. I can see you lean in.
Yes and no. I think the context of a young person missing 20 days of school unexcused, needing to then go to DCF and court by submitting an affidavit to our state's attorney, having that so firmly in place can lose a lot of context as to how we are best supporting that family. Young people that go into a courtroom to talk about attendance, we talk about things like recidivism with young people who may go into court. Like the same is true for truancy. So that touch point of court is very real. And so I think the mandating of that process, where we've seen in other places like Connecticut, who has banned the use of courts in response to attendance, that is not to say educational neglect is not a thing. It still is. It is very much less so than what we think it is and what we see in our courts. So I think the hesitation on that front is more along the lines of having court intervention at 20 unexcused days, this like tipping point of like, now it's the court, can be quite harmful. I've been in a lot of truancy hearings here in Vermont and throughout Colorado. There's never once been a young person in that hearing that was not also living in poverty, not one time. So that is a huge concern.
I just really appreciate you raising that, the 10-day. I worry that this is a sort of permissive, like, go travel the world for 10 days on the family vacation front, and that there's a real values juxtaposition here that I find uncomfortable.
Libby, you said rather than sort of going down the punitive path, we should be incentivizing strategies. Could you be more specific by what you mean by incentivizing strategies?
Yeah, I think I'd have to look at some other legislation, but as Nick pointed out, there are some states that are working towards more supportive frameworks within their legislature. I'd want to take more time with those to really think, how can that look in a law or a bill? I also place some resources here. The attendanceworks.org website, which I attached to my testimony, has a lot of research briefs that talk about how to address chronic absenteeism at a state level as well as a district level. And so I'd want to dig into those. Nick works very closely with attendance work, so he probably has some right off the top of his head. But the other types of bills that are in law in Connecticut, I think Massachusetts is one that has a pretty supportive bill. We could look into and see how could we replicate that for Vermont so we have more supportive framework in place. Nick, what would you add on to that?
I would just add that practices that are promising around restorative justice community panels in response to student attendance can be a way forward, and still bringing forward a level of accountability with families, but from a place of support and bringing resources to the table. When we file truancy, my hope is that it brings more resources to the table through a DCF referral that may bring in Vermont Stabilization Services. However, sometimes I feel like with families, that's the only way I can get these services to families, is to put them through court. So having restorative justice panels, community-based panels, be responding to attendance referrals where families still go and sit with a panel of their community, and they're developing a plan about how to move forward, and assigning resources that way, I've seen be a really solid practice.
I appreciate that. Often my question is, well, who's going to do all that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. There are restorative justice centers throughout Vermont that are doing some of this work. Lamoille County in particular has a great program up there. And let's see, I might file an affidavit and 10 months later, something moves. So I'm not sure the current system is one that is effective as far as timeliness and efficiency.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't mean to, I thought we had a little bit of a post here on this bill, given the testimony we heard yesterday. And, given that the AOE had elevated this, but what I'm hearing, I think, from the two of you is that really the whole, when it moves from sort of absenteeism into legal truancy, is kind of the challenge that it needs more attention.
Yeah, I would just add, sorry, Libby, if you want to. Like over my shoulder.
It's okay. I would think that you have an opportunity here. Like there's a spotlight on chronic absenteeism, and that's an opportunity. And so I'd take our time and really study places that have a more supportive framework and see what we can do with those, if we're opening this up anyway, right? Instead of going with the status quo. Nick?
I mean, I would just also add, like, I've worked a lot with Ann Bordenaro and Courtney O'Brien and the team that has been working on this. And I also would like to just give them a great deal of credit for moving this work forward. I cannot say this all needs to be done in this session and we need to formalize this court response. However, I do think the bill as written does provide a really important step forward of centering chronic absenteeism and how we work to prevent young people missing school. Timeline wise, if we're talking about court intervention and beyond, I think it is really important that we keep it in mind, and that should not get in the way of like moving the work forward this session. As long as we can continue to stay mindful of like, how do we continue to ensure we're not bringing about more inequities on how we work with our families. So I think both things there, and I would give credit to the team at AOE putting this work forward.
I often, as the chair of the committee, I have to think about, okay, what are we capable of here, a group of citizens who are here for 4.5 months, and really what's the work of the field and the AOE together? To me, this is one of those things where we're not really equipped to necessarily come up with what's best for kids and chronic absenteeism and what's the role of DCF and So this is one of those ones where we really lean on the AOE and testimony from the field. Because given our short time, short attention span, and other things that we're dealing with, I worry that the effort to raise this up might fall apart as we sort of say, like, well, it needs a lot more work. Justin, where did you want to add something?
I was just gonna say, I can take responsibility to try to operationalize some of the recommendations and come back with specifics for you if that.
That would be very
It's
helpful.
just been a quick turnaround, so we haven't had a chance to.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That would be very helpful. Representative Brady?
I just so appreciate this is largely about poverty. Like, these are so many multi-layered issues here, but I just hope none of us have the sense that like changing a bill is going to improve absenteeism when they are deep-rooted challenges and very much about poverty and issues far beyond our committee's jurisdiction and issues that are weighing heavily in our society right now.
Thank you both very much. Wendy, if you're there, you're up.
I am. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thank you. I'm happy to just read my testimony into the record and then can take some questions and join Libby and Nick in the conversation if that's useful.
That's great.
So thank you for the opportunity to testify today. For the record, my name is Wendy Baker and I serve as the superintendent of the Addison Central School District. I want to begin by saying that I strongly support the intent of this bill. Our district's chronic absentee rate is 8%. As a district of approximately 1,700 students, we employ 5 social workers, spend over $800,000 in support of mental health services for students and families through the counseling services of Addison County, and invest heavily in structures that intervene early and deeply. Chronic absenteeism is often not about attendance alone. Sometimes it is the first visible sign of deeper issues, including family instability, neglect, or harm. In these cases, the school's role is to notice, document, and connect families with help. What I have to share with you today is not about broad trends or most families. It is about a small number of cases where the current law creates an unintentional loophole, allowing students to exit oversight precisely when their risk is highest. Though these situations raise not only educational concerns, but child welfare concerns that deserve the committee's attention and dedicated language within the bill under consideration. Recently, we had the experience of working with a family whose student had missed approximately 40% of the required attendance days. While in school, the student was an attentive learner, engaged with peers, and responsive to adults. Multiple offers of assistance by the student's trusted adults to lend support to the family in creative ways went unacknowledged. The family was eventually notified that the case would need to be reported for the court's consideration by our district's truancy officer. On the very same day that Deputy State's Attorney Rick Nolan called my office to discuss next steps the court might take to engage the family, the parent submitted a home study enrollment letter to the school and the student was de-enrolled. At that moment, the student exited public school oversight. The chronic absenteeism framework of effective practices no longer applied. The situation involved prolonged disengagement by the family, not by the student, leading our team to develop a growing concern about the student's well-being. During that same period of time, our district also received a home study enrollment letter for another student for whom we had filed multiple reports with the Department of Children and Families based on disclosures made by the student alleging abuse taking place within the home. That student also left public school oversight at the very moment when concerns were becoming most acute. Schools cannot and should not replace child welfare systems, but when educational disengagement and safety concerns overlap, the absence of even minimal educational verification removes one of the few consistent points of visibility for a student. I have deep respect for families who intentionally choose home study and provide thoughtful, high-quality instruction to their children. The reinstatement of more rigorous application criteria and accountability measures designed to protect the educational rights and well-being of home study students reinforces what the vast majority of home study families are already prepared to do as they look into engaging in home study programming. The recommendations put forward by the Vermont Superintendents and Principals Associations in the letter before you are not about limiting choice. Clarifying triggers for oversight, requiring submission of assessment records, and restoring limited authority for the Secretary of Education when credible concerns arise would not affect most home study families at all. For the small number of cases like the ones I've described, these tools could make the difference between a child being seen or not. If we believe that every child in Vermont deserves access to education and protection, then our chronic absenteeism framework must apply consistently across all compulsory attendance pathways. I urge you to include targeted home study provisions recommended by the Vermont Superintendents and Principals Association so that students who are already vulnerable do not unintentionally disappear from view at the moment they may need us the most. Thank you for your time and your careful consideration. I'd be happy to take questions or engage in discussion.
Great. Thank you very much. Some of us were here when we, I would say, loosened the oversight of home study several years ago. I think that part of it is that we felt limited confidence in the system, especially the DCF system, that when you had situations like this, that they would be there as the backstop. Are they?
So what we've learned is that DCF only considers educational neglect as it relates to absenteeism up until age 12. After age 12, DCF will not engage in conversations about that. There are probably some reasonable reasons that their leadership has for that. We're all working together to solve the myriad of social issues that are connected to those challenges. I think my testimony really encourages you to do something simple within your power to do, which is to replace some checks and balances that I'm sure Secretary Saunders would take very seriously in her procedural approach. For example, if there were just simply a check on a homeschool application with a superintendent's office to say, have there been DCF reports from your system, or are there truancy issues at play? That alone, right, would be enough for the secretary to then determine what she felt was important relative to a homeschool application. I think right now we don't have any of those parameters. And that's, we're seeing those situations in our district. And for some of you who might have been at the all members meeting just a little bit early, you may have seen me in preparation for talking about this with you, ask other superintendents to raise their hand if they had had similar circumstance. And Jeff Francis tells me everyone in the room had their hand up. So this is a statewide problem that could be fixed, I believe, with some technical language that allowed for some additional steps to be taken, at the AOE level that I probably are, especially now that their agencies coming together are likely not onerous.
Yeah, thank you. It is, I think, important to point out that sort of relaxation in homeschool oversight happened under previous secretary.
Yeah.
And frankly, a previous reality. So I appreciate that. To the extent that perhaps you could work with Chelsea to provide some specifics, as simple as like what you just suggested seems completely doable and reasonable. And if it can protect these situations. Yeah, absolutely.
Happy to do that. And to your conversation, relative to the role of the courts, we have a really wonderful deputy state's attorney, that is now engaging with all of the superintendents in Addison County around this topic. And one of the things that we're talking about that it might help you to know in your conversations is a pre-hearing mediation session where perhaps the parties, as Nick say, oftentimes these moments are best served if we can bring more resources to the family and the situation. So the perhaps DCF and somebody from our, county mental health agency can come along with the school district and the family to determine what is the best course forward, which might look different, but it's a pre-hearing mediation that could happen. So I believe our deputy state's attorney is attempting to advance that through the proper channels in the court system to determine if the judges would be supportive of that. So that may be something that's helpful to you in these conversations.
Thank you. Any other questions for Superintendent Baker? Nick, would you mind joining us again?
Sure.
So this is just me, and other committee members may not feel the same way. I guess I need a kind of a better picture of sort of chronic absenteeism, like where is it located on the age spectrum mostly?
Absolutely.
And really, what are the main contributing factors? I know we can say poverty, but like specifically, what are the?
Absolutely. So when you look at chronic absenteeism, which includes excused, unexcused, and out of school suspension, when you look at that, if you look by grade, what you'll see is essentially like a U. If it's a bar chart, you have kindergarten over here and you have 12th grade over here. It is essentially like this, is what you would typically see across the country. We see that here locally. So kindergarten is often one of the highest, has one of the highest rates of chronic absenteeism, only behind 12th, 11th grade. We know there's a lot of reasons for that. The young people building their immune systems back up, families learning what it means to have a student in school full time. Still some families thinking it's just kindergarten, will be fine. But what we know and what the research says from pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, if you are chronically absent, the likelihood of a young person being able to read at grade level by the time they're in third grade drops dramatically. So it is one of the earliest indicators of educational outcome when you're talking about chronic absenteeism, even at a pre-K level. So the rates really go from high in the very early grades, tends to drop down a bit in the middle school, and then peak again with our 12th graders.
It might be worth noting for the committee that kindergarten is actually not required, and that schools that do provide, I think, are only required to provide 10 hours. To me, that's like old, and at some point, this committee should probably take a look at like, what is the status of kindergarten? I don't even think there are half-day programs anymore. Anyway, yeah. So, and then can you talk a little bit more about maybe the reasoning at the upper?
Yeah. The reasons are many. To be clear, what Libby was saying earlier, you have everything from a family, a student who may need to care for a younger sibling who's not in school, which is deemed unexcused, to a family that is taking a ski trip in Europe that, as of right now, a superintendent could decide that is excused. Oh, look at the educational value of that. So when we talk about the reasons, there's a whole lot behind. And one of the things I would encourage the group to look at, there's been research in Maryland recently, Minnesota, and California that describes unexcused absences versus excused absences and who gets what. Young people with marginalized identities are way more likely to have unexcused absences than excused absences. In our district, we see everything from high levels of anxiety. So from kindergarten through 12, young people that can't walk through that door for whatever reason. And that's where our social workers come into play. That's where our social emotional learning staff come into play. We also have a serious health dynamic. When we do root cause analysis in our district, health is the number one reason cited as why young people are out. So at that point, we work with Dr. Heidi Schumacher, who is amazing in this space. She has done a lot of projects collaborating with local health centers and schools to have stronger collaboration. So we know health is the number one reason. It takes more than the school to respond to that. It takes our pediatricians locally to get on board with how sick is too sick for school, what does it mean to write an excuse note, and beyond. So it's hard to give you one, here's why. But it is everything from the barriers of anxiety and mental health to needing to work to support their family, to health, and to, even something as wonderful as doing 20 college visits could lead to a young person being chronically absent, right? It's 18 days over the course of a school year is to be chronically absent. That's like missing the month of October. So when we talk about, is it okay if I go to Europe for a week? It's like, well, that's 5 days of school. And over the grand scheme, we're talking about 18 days is to be chronically absent in the end. So it's not just this trip here. It is a multitude of factors and things that are happening along the way.
How much judgment is allowed right now? So I could see a superintendent saying, this kid who's off to Europe for 10 days, just like many high achieving kids, they're going to achieve highly wherever they are, whatever they're doing. So perhaps not worth pursuing.
Yeah.
Where does that judgment come in?
It comes in everywhere. It's bias, right? Like that is ingrained into when a young person walks back into a classroom. If they missed yesterday and the teacher says or saw it's excused versus if they see it's unexcused, it's not a teacher blame thing. We are all kind of trained to see unexcused bad, excused good. And so when you start to like bait into everything, we in our district worked really hard to be very clear about what is excused and what is unexcused. And one of the things that is not on the table in our district is Libby being able to say, I'm okay with this one. I'm not okay with this one. We have very strict guidelines that all of our registrars are very well trained in. And that leads to a lot of phone calls, which I love, because some families are calling because they're very upset that it wasn't excused, that they went and did this thing. And I get to have a conversation with the family and be like, here's why. We care about lost instructional time, and that's what we're responding to. I could go on. There's one piece that I want to also make a note of, which is the ripple effect of chronic absenteeism. Regardless of why that young person is out of school, there's a ripple effect that impacts an entire classroom and an entire school. When a teacher needs to constantly slow down instruction and reteach, and also navigate supporting young people to relearn the habits of being in school, which means increased behavior incidents. When you have that, it is not just the young person who's out of school, it is their peers as well, because instruction in that classroom slows down. Classroom management in that classroom needs to go up. So that ripple effect is also real of if you have a system at 20% or more chronic absenteeism, that is a systemic issue that you need to address that isn't going to go student by student. And you need to honor the fact of what kind of impact that has on young people across your entire school.
Peter, I think there may be some differences in rural areas that are worth noting for the committee regarding sources of chronic absenteeism that we're finding. I don't know if it applies to everyone, but if that's of interest, I'm happy to provide that balance point.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
When you think about areas where if a student misses the bus, now they're dependent on their parent to get to school. So in some of our more rural areas, sometimes students who are small have to walk quite a ways to get to the end of the road because the bus can't go up that road because there's no way for the bus to turn around. You know some of those roads. So in those instances, sometimes, if kids are not able to do that themselves, or if they're not able to get themselves out and going in the morning with all of those skills, and the parent is not able to take them, they're missing school. So one of the things that we're partnering with CSAC around is just ensuring that substance abuse supports are in place and amplified wherever they can be in order to be able to ensure that parents are well, so that they're able to bring their kids to school when they need to. I think one of the other things that we are facing is we do not yet run after-school buses that are activity buses for high school and middle school students. We know that a lot of the things that engage kids, are outside the classroom that schools provide. And so when there's a disproportionate ability for students to be able to take advantage of some of those things, and sometimes that gets you over the hump. The basketball game you're going to play in that night is what brings you to school that day. And if you're not able to reliably take advantage of that because you don't have a ride home, your parent is not able to get you or is not willing to to be able to adjust the family life in such a way that works, that's a challenge. So those are a couple of other things that apply to us. And obviously I just gave you about $1.5 million of resources that we already employ that largely keeps our chronic absenteeism where it is. The after-school buses and things like that would also help for us. But obviously, we're also talking about cost at the same time. And so I think it's important to keep those things in mind.
Any other questions, committee? We'll move on. All right, thank you all very much for your testimony, enlightening, and appreciate the thoughtful comments. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll be back right at 10.